So, pay attention, kids, for the topic of tonight's discussion is the dreaded Cinematic Speedbump. It's the point in a great movie-going experience where the willing suspension of disbelief crashes. That movie that you've been enjoying so much suddenly goes totally off the rails. You're snapped back into reality. You're brutally reminded you've got a greasy handful of popcorn just sitting in a darkened room with a bunch of complete strangers. It's horrible. Whether the speed bump in question is ultimately due to producer interference or director incompetence is always up for debate. But one thing isn't. We really hate speed bumps. So, without further ado, here is the Faced Deep Dive into speed bumps. Number 5. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Helen Shaw. We know what you're thinking. The whole movie's a speed bump.
Lighten up, Francis.
Work with us here. First, remember the mantra. There are only 3 Indiana Jones movies. That being said, James Mangold's Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny starts out great. The opening 30 minutes are actually quite passable, enough for us to even amend our previous statement. There are only 3 Indiana Jones movies, and one pretty good short. But that's not why we're here. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny is what you get when the speed bump happens in the beginning of the flick. Allegedly, Steven Spielberg designed the opening train scene and Mangold extended it to 25 minutes. And then we hit the dreaded speed bump, known as Helen Shaw. Played by Phoebe Waller-Bridge. If only James Mangold, who is actually a decent director, had remembered he's a male and not a male feminist, we might have had a decent finale to one of the greatest screen characters in the last century.
Yeah, all right.
Instead, Mangold spent his time lying about the plot leaks and taking it to Twitter to insult the nerds and hardcore fans. Whose idea was it to see a drunken and divorced Indy? And Phoebe Waller-Bridge is going down in history as the most insufferable female lead that no one asked for, or much less wanted. Spectacular work, James. You snatched defeat from the very jaws of victory. Since you're not half bad, Faced is going to give you a tip on the probable non-existent follow-up to the franchise the House of Mouse has to keep squeezing money out of if they ever expect to get their investment back. It ain't Phoebe Waller-Bridge. That's 3 words. We'll solve the puzzle for you in 2.
Okie dokie, Dr. Jones, hold on to your potatoes.
Short round. Number 4. The Empire Strikes Back. The tree scene. Okay, we've had some fistfights over this one. Empire remains the best of the originals. It has one of the greatest plot twists in movie history.
I love you.
I know.
I'm pretty sure Luke nailed her.
And there's no Ewoks. The perfect example of what happens when you put a speed bump in the middle of the film. Luke, having studied with Master Yoda on the torturous path of the Jedi, gets a tingly feeling. So he goes into a tree cave and fights Darth Vader, lopping off his head only to find out it's himself. Oh no, dun dun dun. Ugh. Some of us at Faced think it's a beautiful bit of foreshadowing. The rest of us, the ones who didn't waste time in college on a useless literature degree, who don't know dick about Joseph Campbell, don't think the scene makes any sense at all. It also slows up the entire pace of the whole movie. Even Yoda just kinda sighs in frustration after it's all over. Pay attention, kids. The greatest way to tell if a scene you're watching is a speed bump is to ask yourself if anything in the entire movie would be worse if this scene weren't in the film. You cut out the tree scene in Empire Strikes Back and you don't lose a step. Oh, and you indie filmmakers, take note. If your speed bump scene is in the middle of your flick, you've probably built up enough goodwill with the audience to get over it relatively unscathed. Number 3. Top Gun Maverick. Functional F-14. We're willing to forgive the fact that the movie's plot is completely ripped from the last 15 minutes of Star Wars. Plus, in our current age of mass media overexposure, Tom Cruise is probably the last bona fide movie star Hollywood has left. But that's not gonna save Top Gun Maverick from our withering critique. This was another close call. The pitch sounds awesome on paper. An aging Maverick trains a new team of Top Guns for a dangerous mission, where he must confront not only the ghost of his past in the form of his dead best friend's son, Rooster, but his own looming mortality with the sad realization his days as a hotshot naval aviator are coming to an end. In fact, this movie works great, especially the part where Maverick becomes a living legend when his plane is shot down, while heroically saving Rooster and the new pilots from a deadly salvo of incoming missiles. The next scene? Brewster joins them on the ground. They find a functional F-14, then they outfly some bad guys and make it back to the cruiser. How did you guys shit the bed on this one? We grew up with Top Gun. We wanted to love this movie. Just do yourself a favor and turn off the flick after Maverick is shot down. Then, close your eyes, play some Berlin synth pop and dream a little dream of what could have been. Unfortunately, we do have to admit the box office doesn't lie, but Top Gun Maverick is still the perfect example of putting your speed bump at the end of the movie. Number 2. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Trudy Frazier and Marvin Schwartz. Quentin's a living legend, especially since Stanley's gone, but Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Tarantino's ode to the late 60s, sputters in more ways than one. The movie itself is more like a collection of brilliant individual scenes. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is still a hypnotic example of filmmaking, but much less of a cohesive work than any other of Tarantino's previous films. And it's mostly because of the 2 speed bumps. With Quentin, we wouldn't expect anything less. Speed bump number 1, Trudy Frazier. Okay, she's cute, she's adorable, and we know she can act. But what in God's name is she doing in a movie about the Manson family? Speed bump number 2, Al Pacino's Marvin Schwartz. You know, this one kinda hurts. You've got one of the most talented actors of all time teamed up with one of the best filmmakers working. We didn't have this much anticipation of something awesome since Pacino squared off against De Niro in Michael Mann's Heat. Instead, we got this? At first, we thought Pacino was there to carry the plot along, but repeated viewings makes that doubtful. Instead of cutting Pacino to the cutting room floor, we get awful scenes of Al hamming it up like some terrible slam poet. All we can think of is that Quentin wanted to work with one of his heroes before the guy died. Go gracefully into the night, sweet prince. You've earned it. Number 1, Danny Boyle's Trainspotting 2. From fade in to fade out. The film's overload of suck becomes blatantly obvious if you watch Trainspotting 1 back-to-back with Trainspotting 2. All the genius camera moves, story technique, and transgressive cinema of the first Trainspotting go right down the toilet with Trainspotting 2. The movie should never have been made. Is there anything lamer than old, vile junkies? At least in the first one, these repulsive losers had a kind of nihilistic charm. There's some rumor that Boyle is planning a 3rd film based on Irvine Welsh's follow-up, The Blade Artist. Begbie might be the only saving grace in Trainspotting 2. We're doubtful he's gonna carry The Blade Artist, but we're all praying Boyle can redeem this mess somehow. So, what have we learned, kids? Speed bumps are the enemy of all great filmmakers. They blow out the pace and tone of every movie you find them. So avoid the speed bumps. And if you dig what we're building, please consider liking the video and subscribing to our channel. A very heartfelt thanks from Face.